Good morning, everyone. It's after 10 o'clock in the East. Do you know where your children are? It's an old joke, poor one, but it makes me giggle every time I say it. I don't know why.
I remember that on the news when I was a kid. It's 10,
Yeah,
10
the
o'clock. Know where your kids are.
right. Okay, there we are. We're both being displayed on YouTube now. Um, and Anyway, today we're going to read an essay by John Dourley, and John Dourley was a Catholic priest. I'm sorry to say he's died now, um, but he wrote this essay as one of the last things that he wrote before he died. And so let me,
What page are we on?
we are on page 87. But I'm going to read his bio first. Okay, so John Dourley, PhD, is a graduate of the C.G. Jung Institute, Zurich in 1980, from Fordham University, New York City, 1971, St. Michael's College, Toronto, 1966, St. Paul University, Ottawa, 1964, and St. Patrick's College, Ottawa, uh, 1957. He taught in the religion department of Carleton University in Ottawa at St. Patrick's College from 1970 to 1979. In the parent department at Carleton, whatever the parent department is, until 2001. He is currently professor emeritus. He has written extensively on Jung and religion and has 3 books with Routledge since 2008. They are Paul Tillich, Carl Jung, and the Recovery of Religion, 2008. On Behalf of the Mystical Fool, Jung on the Religion Situation, 2009, and Jung and His Mystics, In the End, It All Comes to Nothing, 2014. He is a training and supervising analyst with the Ontario Association of Jungian Analysts, Toronto, and a member of AGAP, Zurich. He is a Catholic priest and member of the religious order, the Oblate of Mary Immaculate. And that is John Dourley's background. Um, so just reading that makes me want to read his books posthumously. I hope his religious order gets some of the money from that when I get around to it. 3 more weeks of school, and I am ready for them to be over. Good morning, Art. Nice to see you today. Um, let's see what we're going to do here. I keep getting notices to block out my YouTube chat. Okay. All right. So, Jung, The Nothing and the All by John Dourley. And I have in a side note on this book, division from our natural selves. And so this is one of the things that, that Mr. Dourley is, or Father Dourley is writing about. In the opening pages of the Red Book, Liber Novus, Jung identifies the severance of the spirit of this time from the spirit of the depths as the primary pathology of individual and culture in his milieu. He confesses that he himself had been its victim. I had to become aware that I had lost my soul. He had, quote unquote, he had objectified the soul in the name of psychology as science. He had removed her from the totality of human experience, reducing it to mind in interplay with the senses and to a sterile scholarly approach to the depths of his own being. Such research made of him nothing less than a murderer of the soul. Later, in Liber Novus, his portrait of the scholar of science is a depressing picture of a man imprisoned in his library within an isolated castle in the middle of a swamp. The hermit is nearly impervious both to the approach of Jung and to the presence of his own daughter in a nearby room. In Jung's imagination, the scholar's removal from his anima and from his soul becomes the same removal. There could hardly be a more forceful portrayal of living in an intellect quarantined from those vitalities accessed only in the flow of a deeper psychic and spiritual life. Okay, Jordan, you want to comment on this?
Yeah, I think he's driving at the intellect would say that intuition is irrational, and then intuition would just laugh and say, "You have no business talking about intuition. You are thinking.
Yes.
All reasons are unreasonable. They come like a volcano erupting." So I think he's kind of driving at that when Jung led into from the intellect. And I like the imprisoned in a library inside an isolated castle. I mean, that's mind within
In a
mind.
swamp.
Swamp. Yeah, it's mind within mind. So instead of even a moat, what's protecting it is swampy, not country garden regulated like a river of a moat.
Right. And so I did a painting about this some time ago. I guess it was before Christmas. Some of you know of it. But my point is that everything that is in philosophy, every philosopher you ever wrote is somebody mansplaining some phenomenon. Okay, that's what they're doing. And that's all well and good, and it's all very logical, but it's very rationalistic, and it's putting down railroad tracks where none were before. And so I'm going to share this painting with you now. I just pulled it up.
It reminds me of a short story my dad wrote called Heidegger's Letter to Mama. And it's just this arabesque of saying the same thing over and over and over and over. Just it's so petitiony, like trying to, cry for attention.
Yeah. So this is my painting entitled Tracks to Nowhere Through Magnificence. And it's when you turn the AI loose on this, it really becomes interesting. But in any case, the tracks represent all logic, everything logical, and the magnificence of all the colors from the sun on out represents the natural world. And so, we don't even make this much of a track in the magnificence of the universe, not at all. Because everything that was built by human beings and everything that is human for that matter was an explanation of something that came before, and it all goes back to magnificence. Comments, Jordan?
Yeah, it's like abstract calligraphy, and I'm starting now to see this basket and this glyph, and since I have you graciously sent me a copy of this, leave it on my coffee table. So when I sit down, I kind of just look at it for a little bit and just let it steep. And I'm really now just really noticing the sun in the middle contrasted to the indigo blue thick fork lines at the top left. And then the red at the bottom, where I start to really pay attention to how they ghost, disappear, or abruptly stop at the end of each fork stroke or fork tine stroke. Yeah, I'm really seeing, it's almost like I'm sitting on Jupiter looking out to the sun, or sitting on Earth looking at the sun, but in space, because the sun has this kind of glorious golden daylight, the circle in the middle. That there's a whole landscape in that kind of pentagonal-ish center, that like I'm looking through a window to see all this chaos all around comes to frame a window that's not of any kind of regular shape in the middle, where literally it's photographic, including the red below the sun, and the kind of burned watercolor bones, stripes, mountain range, Mount Rushmore-ish thing to the bottom left of the sun. Yeah, I just now noticed that I've been looking at it almost elementally, trying not to interpret. And then just now, though, it feels like I see a window, like a landscape of sun and red earth in that centerpiece.
Yeah, I mean, I did not plan this. I just put some dabs of watercolor paint out on my um, paper, wet paper. I had it quite wet, and then I ran my fork through it
Yeah.
a few times, and I wasn't trying to plan anything. But then when I looked at it, I said, "Oh my God, this is exactly what Jung was talking about in all of his writings. Everything is about this. In the end, it's about, the depths, the natural world versus what our times are telling us, which is what the forks are."
Mm-hmm.
And and so I just didn't have anything else to say in this painting, and I ever, since it's just a lucky shot. Took about an hour and a half to do that painting.
It's almost
And
an invert of outer space.
right. And of course, everybody knows my other um, thing that I like to show people, um, just to put things in perspective, because uh, we have to we have to keep things in perspective. And
That's a really good point, because I think even me saying that I work to not interpret and just steep in something for a while, because I think what happens is it gets me beyond my expectation and perception, and then there's it is what it is from perspective, and then it's neither good nor bad. It is what it is, and then it's my job to discern what is it.
yeah, and this is the other one, which was taken by Dr. Porco, I believe her name is. from the Cassini spacecraft, and that's the Earth there in that pale blue dot that Carl Sagan used to speak of. But everything that's ever happened to all the species on Earth, all of us, all the species from the beginning of time, everything happened there. And beyond that, beyond the very vague atmosphere that you can see there, we don't know of any living thing in the universe, not a single thing. I mean, Deb and I have dear friends who work for NASA, and they're both astrobiologists. And we asked her one time, my wife asked her one time, what would be the high point of your career? And she said, to find a microbe that came from anywhere but Earth, any microbe.
Building block of life. All right.
Yeah, and that hasn't happened. And so it really makes us feel small, I guess, or it makes me feel small, but it also keeps things in perspective a bit.
Yeah, when I see that, I feel a sense of peace, and that, if it's not going to matter in 5 years, don't spend a whole lot on it. And someone weeks ago said, someone's like, "Oh, I'm just having such a bad day," and they said, "Are you really?" And the person, startled, looks back like, "Yes," and she says, "Are you really having a bad day? Or did you have a bad 5 minutes and now you're milking it for the rest of the day so you don't have to do what you're supposed to do?"
Yeah. And so Cherie says, good morning. I was just listening to Dr. Fraud, Professor Richard Wolff's wife. She was talking about how mental health was affecting our country and how Carl Jung was in the early stages of AA. And yes, of course, that's important and interesting fact. He actually didn't know it.
Yeah, he didn't know, but one of his clients.
Well, he expressed the key to AA without knowing it, because what was his name? Well, Bill Wilson was the founder of AA, but Bill Wilson had a friend who was Jung's client, and his friend got this kernel of brilliance from Dr. Jung, and it saved him from alcoholism. And then he conveyed it to Bill Wilson, and then Bill Wilson created AA around that. And so, yes, Jung was in the early stages of AA. He actually provided the initial insight, but then he didn't know anything about it for 30 years, because that happened in something like 1929, and Bill Wilson wrote to him in 1960, I think. And there is a terrific book called Carl Jung and the Founding of Alcoholics Anonymous. So it's worth reading. Okay, just in case, good morning, or whatever it is at your place. Here's too much rain to work outdoors, so I'll watch you instead. Too much rain outdoors. Okay. Cassini's photo of Earth from Saturn was made on July 19th, 2013, and is named the day the Earth smiled. Correct, because They knew it was coming, that they were going to photograph this, and they suggested to people around the world that they smile up at that day. And so on that pale blue dot, you can see everybody smiling. Um, and Anyway, reading on. The personal and social experience described here led to an ambivalent relation to science itself, expressed both in Liber Novus and carried over into later works that have published in the collected works. On the one hand, bowing to the scientists of his age, Jung would describe his work as scientific and so describe himself as a scientist. Yet in his Red Book, in dialogue with an imaginal Eastern giant seeking wisdom in the West, he indicts science with the crime of being societal poison. It bears only a knowledge of outer things and knows little or nothing of the inner world of the enlivening divine. It has removed from its constituency the ability to believe, not in the sense of commitment to a formal creed or doctrine, but in the sense of unmediated experience of the depths of reason itself. It is made wholly of words and is a magic greatly injurious to its surroundings. This poison has paralyzed the enlightened who have drunk so deeply of it. In its self-imposed poverty, scientific research has lost the ability to deal with real life and has reduced the psyche of a mind estranged from the vigor and play of the full range of the total psyche. Okay, Jordan.
Yeah, I like the societal poison. It kind of speaks to, I guess, Mrs. Cherie, who was saying, the rash of mental illness, and with Dr. What's her name? The Harvard psychiatrist that recently did the study with schizophrenics. Starts with an E. Not placing her name, but
You're not talking about Bandy Lee, are you?
no, her last name starts with E. She's got shorter brown hair. She's like, I can't believe I can't remember her name. She's really impressive with what she's been doing, stepping past the what's being found out to be the myth of mental illness. That's actually a nutritional deficiency. Too much sugar, too many carbs that then poisons the brain, shrinks it. And her, she had, I think, 30 patients, some of which who had been serious schizophrenics for, over 25, 30 years. And she put them all on a high protein diet, some of them on a keto, some of them on carnivore. And within 3 weeks, all of them were beginning to be functional.
Hmm.
And what it was that they weren't getting enough fat. And there was a whole, the big fat myth is a book that that I read last year, and it's interesting because your liver produces cholesterol.
Yeah.
And if you have, for example, too many, what are they called? Oxalates, like spinach and kale and such. What happens is there's a nicotinic receptor, and cholesterol and oxalates compete for the same receptor.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is oxalates basically calcify, they harden, whereas cholesterol is a tissue repair mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
And I know firsthand that when I went carnivore almost 2 years ago, 3 months in, all of my scars turned pink.
Ah.
And I was scared because I was like, are they going to rupture? And because they look so new, come to find out what it was that oxalates and the calcium don't immediately release. They just do so step by step incrementally. And what it was that the calcium was detaching from the scars, and the cholesterol was coming back in as the tissue repair mechanism to finish healing them. And these are scars from when I was 2, 4, and 6 years old. And so, they were 50 plus years old. And what's interesting is, I wish I could remember her name, but that a lot of the mental illness is not a chemical imbalance, it's a nutritional deficiency, which could be said to be a chemical imbalance. But also, Dr. Jordan Peterson said not everyone who has anxiety has been traumatized. They might have actually just encountered someone who's truly malevolent, and looking in their eyes startled their soul.
Yeah.
So they just hadn't recovered. So I think it's interesting that now when I hear just the phrase mental illness, I carry with it somewhat of a skepticism that's vague. We're supposed to think that, but then what, like the first paragraph, in this chapter, what drove someone into their current state? And then the multivariable equation, opens up, and I'm not a doctor, can't speak to it, but I think that the nutritional piece, as we're seeing in modern health, even the food pyramid is kind of upside down. Carbs aren't really necessary, and in fact, they immediately turn to sugar.
Mm-hmm.
And sugar is poison, and you really need salt to retain the water. It's like you give a salt lick to a horse or a cow. So anyway, just my little soapbox, but I think it speaks also to, I think it was Cherie who mentioned the mental illness that's so prevalent. And I think a lot of it is just stunted development because people aren't strong from being nourished.
Right. Well, going a little bit further in this, where he says scientific research has lost the ability to deal with real life. I would say our education system has also lost that ability, because, as most of you know, most of my career was in business, more than 40 years, but 3 years ago, I took up the task of being a public school teacher because I had been certified in New York to do that in 1968, believe it or not. But I never taught in K through 12 until 3 years ago. And since then, I have honestly been appalled at the education system that has evolved since I was a kid, because now they have nationwide sliced and diced every subject down so refinedly that, for example, in the state of Maryland, they can tell you on this day, every teacher in social studies is going to be teaching this type thing. Now, I work at an alt school where we don't actually follow that closely, but and my school is all about mental health in many ways, but the reality is that they've let the logicians, the logic people, go at the education system to the max. And the result is, as I said to our principal one day, well, they've sliced and diced everything in education, but they haven't talked to any kids.
Yeah, right. And I think that's a great point with the education system, because if I look at the parallel with mainstream media these days, if you watch, if I watch news from where you are and I watch news from where I am, And when they say the exact same words, there's a script which is sliced and diced, which is, in programmed indoctrination. Whereas when I was growing up, I remember having signs above the chalkboard that said question authority, be skeptical.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the opposite now of what's going on, which causes, and people, want to be so rational. Well, if you want to be so rational, why don't you have some facts and not just the ones that are presented to you? Go do your own work. It reminds me, frankly, of it's been going on not just now, recently. I mean, the whole story of Pandora's box. Well, if you go back to the original, that's a bad translation in the title. It's Pandora's vessel, and vessel implies her natural self.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is they also truncate the end of the story so they can demonize her because she peers into the vessel and she releases all the malaise and ills and plagues into the world. Well, that's just cleaning out the filter through the Negretto process of alchemy, and she's cleaning. But then so right then they stop. Period. End of story. The end, and everyone blames her for all the ills in the world. Well, the rest of the story goes after all that left her. She peered back into the vessel, meaning peering back into herself, and all she saw in the blackness, in the dark infinity of outer space inside, was a golden fledgling squirming yod of eternal hope. And she picked it up and she put it in her heart. So, that whole truncation is just like, mainstream media, the education system. They'll slice and dice to give you what they want you to hear, but they often take the good stuff that actually is that finale. They stop at the denouement, when it's depressing, when it's depressing towards the end, and your favorite character is about to go, and then they stop, and it's a real buzz killer. Instead of getting the finale where you leave inspired.
Yeah. Don't I know it? Well, anyway, we as sensible human beings have got to think about the education of our youth, and it is pretty rigid right now. So going on, nor has this critique softened in his later writings as the history of the factors contributing to such psychological impairment became clearer to him. He continued his critique of science as the dominant religion of his time, and so the new opium of the people. In particular, science was the preferred drug of the devotees of the goddess of reason and enlightenment, rationalism, whose shallow clarity was so susceptible to archetypal possession and so to collective violence. Unremittingly harsh, though this criticism remained, it must be made as clear as possible, as it possibly can, that Jung was in no way opposed to science, the Enlightenment, or reason in themselves. What provoked his vitriol was the perverse reduction of human cognition and effect to science as the solely valid activity of consciousness. His real enemy is Blake's Urizen, the more recent history of the mind that produced a sovereignty of reason, trending to science and technology, in the face of which the opposition of a largely fundamentalist and literal religion was all too easily and happily dismissed. The consequence was a society based upon a superficial, rational meaninglessness, a science reduced to impressive gadgetry, and a religion grounded in sacrosanct unintelligibility. Liber Novus document documents Jung's earliest diagnosis of the problem in anticipation of his later work. Uh, Jordan?
Yeah, so it seems to me it's making the point of this is undeveloped mentality or undeveloped being, and that means the scientific and overly rational only, without the inner life included, translates to childish petitioning. You're still crying for attention. Now, with a kid, that's curiosity and wonderment, and they're growing and learning. But as you get to an adulthood, you need the childlike connection so you can keep your sovereignty. I mean, try to rule over a 4-year-old. You better pick the right battle, because that they realize you had a button they just pushed, and that's power to them, and they won't let up. And it's like, you over scold a kid, and they know that they're not going to change their behavior, they're going to hide it better, but they also realize, look at the power button, I can move the adult. I don't, and that's like a little mini checkmate they found. And they don't do it logically, they do it because it was effective. It
Yeah,
worked.
it
So
works.
it works. So I think the difference between a
If I
child,
cry, she'll change my diapers.
yeah, exactly. It's like, childish petitioning versus childlike sovereignty.
Yeah.
And question of, authority versus sheeple. Just being led around by the nose. Well, maybe it's not lazy. Maybe it's someone's overstimulated with too much information, and they don't know how to swim in the storm.
Yeah. And this is, I think has to do with why it's sometimes very difficult to read Carl Jung, because we're brought up in a society where science is king type thing. And so when he's criticizing science and talking about the subjective psyche, it's hard to wrap your mind around it as you're reading it, especially as you're reading it for the first time. Now, I've had to read these things, many times, and I'm starting to grok it now. But
Well, and I think reading Jung is one way to teach you how to listen and
yeah,
not just be spoon fed like a baby bird.
yeah,
Because when you realize he's talking about the establishment, he's talking about the intellect, he's talking about overly rational and overly reasonable things, but he's talking about them from an overly rational standpoint. And so, in that sense, it makes too much sense to be worth a damn sometimes. So when you want to see through, I found when I started reading him as a narrator instead of teaching me, because with the insight, it's more story of an experience than it is a geometric proof laid out to come to a product. And I think that understanding that he's writing from an overly rational standpoint, but from his perspective, so he can try to get to the facts we haven't seen yet, that haven't been
yeah.
talked about. So it's interesting to intelligibly communicate something that's actually abstract or dynamic or alive.
Right. And he was certainly seeing in the sense of insight,
Yeah.
having insight about things way ahead of where he was writing. And so to get from here to there was a big task. It was a 20-volume task. Yeah.
Well, and I think that's a really, really good point about seeing further, because as he's writing, he's emerging from the chrysalis, which means he's not clamped down by the constraints of everything he's been taught. So it kind of removes the words he's expected to use, removes the structure of the words he's expected to utilize, and he can kind of be that fresh flesh, just emerging, still green behind it, still wet behind the ears, kind of thing. And then that's, I think, why he tilled new ground. Even the
Okay.
earth he's tilling was different than the earth he was standing on. I mean, so I think that he created a world that was already, he created a dynamic expression of something that's always been there, but in a sense, so big and so there, you can't see it.
Yeah. So
So you can
Cherie
see part of it.
says, I listened to Dr. Lionel Corbett, Jungian's analyst, Jungian analyst. His latest book, Psychoresis, Psychorealsis of Dr. Seal, was published by Arcade Publishing in New York and first published by Samuel Beckett, Kurt Vonnegut, and Mo Yan, who won the Nobel Prize. His novel was released this past February. Okay, well, tell us more about it, Cherie, because I don't know why you're mentioning it right now, but you can tell us why. Okay, so fortunately, the soul of Jung lost to a consciousness removed from it, lost to a consciousness removed from it, refused to yield to such illness. Uh, Effectively, the soul forced itself back upon Jung, and commerce with it became an incredible journey toward the unfathomable, which we call the divine. The depths insisted on their, excuse me,
Bless you.
um, hmm, the
Bless you.
where am I? Okay, the depths insisted on their admission to consciousness. And though the cure they worked was never divested of suffering, the life they restored to Jung, as described in the Red Book, was to become the rudimentary structure and power of his later, more discursive writings. So much came to change. As the depths emerged, their sacred nature came with them. They could be prayed to. Pray to your depths, um, waken the dead. Jung came to see them revealed in the personal revelation of the dream, pointing to and enabling a far fuller life could could the dead system of his previously wholly intellectual psychology. He would contend that the heroic ego had to be dispensed with if the depths were to be fully impact the conscious mind. He would insist that only the recovery uh, of the mind's life-giving connection with the depths of the psyche would create that more universal sympathy that could undermine the tragic, often lethal animosities existing between nations and communities. Indeed, he came to realize that the hostilities of the First World War were externalizations of the psychic hostilities within his psyche and the psyche of the masses caught up in the conflict. But perhaps the most important conclusion from these remarks remains Jung's frank confession at the opening and closing of his Red Book that its description of the recovery of his soul in such vivid pre-rational imagery contained the primal stuff that he was to expound with more measured deliberation in his later so-called scientific work. This confession Jung brings to us in two major questions facing today's culture. Quote, one, is not the severance of the spirit of our time from the depths of collective and individual humanity not as prevalent in our time as in Jung's, and so is not his effort to bring about their integration as important now as it was when he wrote Liber Novus, that's the Red Book. Would not the realization make the collected works a valued resource in theory and therapy? If humanity is to save itself from its own removal from the inner and only source that could unite its many conflicting archetypal expressions in diverse communities bonded religiously and politically to the powers latent in those very depths. That was question one. Since Jung came to see, as his reflections in the Red Book continued, that the needed recovery of the soul is a religious process, does the work not urge a new cultural religious perspective, one that may be in considerable tension with the major religious orthodoxies, a tension explaining their admiration of Jung's religious sensitivities and their refusal to accept the war, uh, refusal to accept the way he sees the religious impulse moving into a future beyond monotheistic claims in so many ways. The questions may coalesce in an examination of Jung's Septem Sermones ad Mortuis, Seven Sermons of the Dead, in the last section of the Red Book. Scrutinies, here in the form of uh, Gnostic myth, related elsewhere to the Gnostic teacher Basilides, is an effort to show how the spirit of the depths might come to pervade the spirit of the time, with a societal and individual religiosity at once more internally profound and yet more externally encompassing than any cultural perspective then or now existent. Jung's thrust would be that the deeper into one's interiority one is, led by the spirit of the depths, the more inclusive does one's embrace of the beyond become, since the within, the depth, is the living source of the totality of the beyond, and no less a figure than his anima insists, much against his preference, that he is indeed to be the bringer of a new religious perspective to his culture. Okay, Jordan.
Yeah, it seems I had wrote down on question two. Yep, one new way with no explanation and no drama, all action, all experience, and then up about the recovery of the mind's life-giving connection with the depths of the psyche, that to learn to swim in the storm with an effectively bright focus instead of reactionary warring.
Yeah.
Welcome, Amel.
Yes. Hello, Mel.
And then I think the questions that may coalesce. There's the inner infinity and the outer infinity, and we live at that confluence of them. And just like as above and so below, spirit above, soul below, we live at the confluence of those two. So I think the 1, 2, 3, 4 there, the double confluence of above and below, inner and outer, give us that 4 psychological function circle that's kind of our compass. You know, you square the circle, meaning you draw a line across the circle, gives it identity. And if we take the intuition, feeling, thinking, sensation circle of the psychological functions, and then we put us pinned to the middle, and where do we point? You know, what's each of our true north? You know, lead from feeling, lead from thinking, lead from action, lead from intuition. And then the results of what's the environment around us, above, below, inside, and outside, based on how we each are that compass needle, that magnet.
Well, and it's, in the end, it comes down to Jung's dictum that the collective unconscious is God, and that our individual unconscious is our God. It's a confusing idea, but all of us are driven by something, and
Well,
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think it's interesting because I no longer feel inner divinity. I think I hatched it because when I realized God is the universe as divine, and then I'm just a fractal of that. That means I don't have inner divinity. I am divine. And so when you treat yourself with that kind of self-respect, things things change. I mean, what you realize you don't aspire so much. You realize how simple things really are. I mean, we're all told, oh, it's not that simple. Well, that's a way to kill someone's heart and make it where it's so complex. You have to still prove yourself, show your work. I mean, I just show up at my table.
Yeah.
That's my business plan now. It's not 16 pages of 15% growth year over year or whatever. Um, I go sit at my table and get paid to talk to people with pictures, and and it's like a crayon. It's a coloring book, and I
Yeah.
never know what I'm gonna get. It's like Forrest Gump and the chocolates. You never know which one you're gonna get, or whatever.
Right.
And
Right.
but what happens is then that simplicity is what keeps it alive and interesting. And then there's an ebb and a flow between rational intuition, feeling, sensation. It's just this double ocean flow. The tide coming in, the tide coming out. The tide comes in and the beach looks all clean. Well, the tide goes out, there's all these shells. So I think just those kind of movements are being described in these paragraphs between not a either or, but a big both and of the completeness. So I remember in college, a friend of mine said, God is so big and so there you can't see. And he didn't say him, it, or her. He just, God is so big and so there you can't see. And I think that's important because then that's the life force that's moving through and pulsing through everything.
Yeah. Interesting. Jay Tanner here on YouTube says, in your darkness lies the face of God, quote unquote, which is Jung's dictum on the shadow. And Cherie says, full compassion can come out. Jung put it from a shift. The way the way Jung put it, I am lived so that I am lived so that the shift must occur. Um, you know, I work in a place where the entire faculty is filled with empathy. I never saw such a group of people that is so empathetic as my colleagues. And maybe I am to a degree also, and I'm drawn to it for that reason. But we can't heal the world by lacking empathy, it seems to me. Um, so Archiphanes says, um, the images are manifest to mankind, I believe, but the light in them remains concealed in the image of the light of the Father. He will become manifest, but his image will remain concealed by his light. Okay, I mean, that's certainly a way to look at it. And
And to speak to that, I think directly, and that's a great statement. But as a counterpoint too, for example, when you feel it's dark all around, you're kind of expected to think, oh, I'm depressed or I'm sick or I'm sad. Instead of that, if you look at what is simply is, when it's dark all around, maybe it's because you are the light. So at that point, in the harsh time, someone else may be looking to you
yeah,
and be inspired by you And when they see you swim brightly in the storm, you may help them out of their own drowning without even
Yeah,
know without even knowing it. And so I think when it's dark all around, first check to make sure you're not the light. Because I think what happens is that's not conceited or self-righteous or self-centered. It's you're living in the present. You're living in the present. You're the pale blue dot in all that darkness.
there's no doubt about it. And I want to refer to this incident that occurred a couple months ago where the stepfather of one of our children was murdered in front of three of our children at a school bus stop, literally murdered. And the children, their natural instinct was to come to school because we are the light. They they knew that they would be safe with us. And, it's just a special moment and fact.
That's a responsive move to the light instead
Yeah,
of reactionary moth to flame. So there's the health again, the back and forth, the healthy is what, like you said, they're drawn magnetically to the light instead of the moth reactionarily going to the flame, which is detrimental.
yeah,
So their natural tendency is to go towards health.
right. Okay, so let's read on. This is a rather long essay. We're not going to get to the end of it today. Um, we have another 14 pages to go, but I think it provides us with lots of food for thought because, as you see in my copy, I've underlined plenty of lines in it. It's really an important essay. Okay, let's go on. The first of the series of sermons preached by Jung's spokesman, Philemon, to the disappointed dead returning without the enlightenment they expected from the other side, begins with what is, in effect, the corrosion of John's prologue. In the beginning is not the word. Here, in the beginning, there is nothingness. The nothing would seem to precede the word, and all mentations beyond whose grasp it wholly lies. However, this nothingness is at the same time a fullness, a pleroma, and the source of both creation and consciousness. Here, Jung begins to play with a sophisticated metaphysical conception of participation. It is the essence of or nature of the finite creature to live apart and distinct from the pleroma, and yet the creature and all that it is participates or is part of the pleroma essentially remove from the eternal. The finite creature remains part of it, for the pleroma as the creator's source pervades the all. In this remark, Jung echoes the words of Marguerite Porete, a 14th century mystic who insisted that unless she could attain the nothing, she could not be all. Indeed, Jung later all but quotes her literally when he refers to the soul validity of the contemporary spirituality as standing, quote, before the nothing out of which all may grow, unquote. At this point in the early unfolding of the myth, some allusion to the creature's return to the pleroma might be expected, but here it is not provided. On the contrary, the creature is by its nature driven to differentiate itself from the pleroma, and in so doing to establish its individuality or singularity. At the time he wrote Liber Novus, Jung considered the creature's return to the pleroma negatively, as a dissolution working to retreat from the ongoing creation of finite individually, and so a betrayal of its essence. The mature Jung would reverse this position in his treatment of Eckhart, whose breakthrough into the dissolution of the Godhead was precisely what Jung here abhors. Jung, in the context of Liber Novus, is primarily concerned with the procession of the creature from the pleroma and its outgoing finite development. To do this, he borrows a medieval phrase, principium individuationis, the principle of individuation, to describe the drive toward being an individual moving progressively away from a regressive dissolution in the wealth of its source, the pleroma, to an ever deeper engagement in the demands of finite life and the making of the individual. Jung applies the same phrases to Jesus as representative of the divine life latent in the unconscious and drawn into consciousness in the making of the divine human being or human individual. Jordan.
The concept of, I think it's sui generis, SUI, and then GENERIS, is something self-creating out of nothing. So there's the Big Bang, there's the first spark, there's inception. And in one sense, it's the onset of individuation, or the onset of consciously individuating. And then later, out of that nothing, I found personally, I dispensed with individuation not as a sequence anymore, just a living process, not then needing to, where am I on my development scale? And I think what happened then is that's became, oh, I'm simply me. And instead of striving for growth, it became the simplifying to just simply what am I? So I think that at each of those places, personally, something came out of what was something now became nothing, and then something new came out of the previous nothing. So there's the concept of rite of passage or milestones in the moment, and this whole dissolution, retreating from the ongoing creation, is interesting because you're dissolving what is so that what's new can grow in the garden, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the divine / human individual, where that's making, putting together divinity from what you already are. And I'll pause there.
I was watching this.
What's so funny?
Go ahead, Amela.
I was watching this movie called The Laundromat with Meryl Streep, and it's such a great movie. And so in one part of the movie, they talk about the genocide against these spiritual people, like the individuals who are practicing, I forget how to pronounce it correctly, Fulan Shu or something.
Feng Shui?
No, not Feng Shui. Fulan Shu, I think it's called. I know it's Fulan, but I think it's Shua, the third part of it. And so what it is, it's sort of like a kung fu stretch. And so in the movie, people that are like Uyghurs, the Muslim minority ethnic group in China, they've been known to be tortured, or this is a little bit traumatic what I'm about to say.
The Uyghurs is you're talking
Yeah,
about.
so tortured to death, and sometimes like these people who are very spiritual Buddhists, like Tibetan monks or the Uyghurs or the people practicing Falun Shui, they have their organs removed and sold into the black market because they're so healthy and so natural. They live off of the earth and they have these diets which they consume that are very natural and healthy, and just in general their lifestyle, because they're so active with nature and very divine people who practice very holy routines. And so they're being killed for, for their organs and such. And this is a huge problem, and I'm so glad that it's in this movie, because it's part of dark money, and not only dark money but also people who want to feel more divine. And there are some very sick and disturbed individuals in this world who feel that doing these things by harming others brings them closer to divinity, but in fact it's only natural to the cosmos that this person is disturbed and evil, or disturbingly evil. Because going back to what I was saying before, sometimes what we do or say might seem evil, but it's not necessarily as vile as what some other person might do. And so what divinity looks for one person may not necessarily be divine for another person. And so everyone defines divinity in different ways, where one person might wake up in the morning and do astrophysics, and that's divine for them, whereas another person goes to church and donates $20, that's divine for them. So divinity is very interpersonal. And so divinity might come from something that we've learned, or something that we can develop to understand. What does it mean to be closer to divinity instead of becoming divine? Because like enlightenment, some people could go to yoga and meditate and study Buddhism or read Sanskrit scriptures all day for 30 years and still not be enlightened. So it's more in a sense of inner self exploration, and how you as a person can contribute. Whatever the religious ideology is, we are all, our purpose in life, in my understanding, is what we can offer. I don't want to sound like ask not what the government can do, ask what the people can do, or something like that.
Yeah. Ask what you can do for your government.
Yeah, exactly. What
Yeah.
can you do? So what are you contributing to the community? What is your role here? And in a sense, that's a greater collective of divinity, is what each of us has to offer. Just like in this one text, where every single person takes their turn, has their opportunity to say, this is how I interpret Jung. And for some people here, Jung is a religion. It is a way of thinking, and I think it's a very coexist kind of uh kind of environment so far, from since we've began reading.
Yeah,
I
there's
appreciate. Go
there's
ahead.
there's an idea in Buddhism and also in Deuteronomy. I don't remember the exact quote in Deuteronomy, but in Buddhism, the um, the idea is if you see the Buddha coming down the road, kill him. Okay, and the point being that if you're going to go out and start teaching that you're enlightened and you know better than anybody else, and you get people to flock to you, which has happened any number of times in world history, where somebody claims that they're the Enlightenment, and they do something, some party trick that makes everybody pay attention at the beginning, and then everybody swarms to them. But almost by definition, those people are not the answer, okay? Because the answer is within you. It's within your life to find the answer, but not preach it.
Well, and it's like between what you just said and then Amela bringing up the kind of dignity and difference of, your way, my way. They don't have to be the same way. It reminds me, early on in my architectural career, I came in. I had switched my schedule because I worked better at night then, and I worked till way late. So there's not going to be coming into the office at 5 in the morning. I'm just about to go to sleep then. So I switched my schedule around, and we had talked about it. But one day I walk in the office. It's like, I guess 9, and he goes, the early bird gets the worm. And I said, yes, but the second mouse gets the cheese. And that was the end of that. It's like, so I didn't disagree. I just, your way, my way. Oh, and you're muted. You're muted still.
I sometimes say to myself, why am I sponsoring this group every week? And the simple answer is I don't know. I'm called to do it. And it isn't because I call people or suggest um, that I know anything more about Jung than anybody else. In fact, the more I know, the less I know.
Yeah, the more we go through this, it unravels, or actually it grows. From what I knew is now kind of elemental and fundamental, but it's just the soil. And we go through this back and forth, and I'll see things in ways that were simpler, more complex, but I re-experience familiar things differently. And I think that's kind of the growth. When I said I dispense with individuation, I'm really just not concerned about it anymore. I just know that it's basic, natural, and important. But knowing that is all I need to know, and then I need to live it. And so, I stumble as much as anybody else. So, and I like here when we stumble and then I find something new. I mean, you fall flat on your face, you have a different perspective.
Yeah, for sure. So my kids who are in their early teens keep asking me, are you afraid of death, Mr. Conover? Because that's what kids are obsessed with is death, and the fact that they too will die. They figure that they've heard there's a rumor that they too will die, right?
I like Mark Twain's quote on that. When this Mr. Twain, are you afraid of death? He said, I was dead for billions of years and it didn't affect me at all.
Yeah.
But he went the other way, not as an end, it was a precursor.
Yeah. Um, well, my answer is always when you're dead, you don't know you're dead. It's only difficult for your family. And when you're stupid, it works exactly the same
Yeah,
way.
yeah,
Right. And I do recall Edward Edinger saying, no, I'm not afraid of death, um, but I'm not looking forward to the process that gets me there.
right. Well,
Um,
Woody Allen said, "I'm not afraid of death. I just don't want it to happen to me."
yeah, and so I'd rather be W.C. Fields, who said, I'd rather be in Philadelphia.
Is
I think that's on his tombstone, you know?
it?
I believe so. Oh my God. Okay. Let me read on.
Yeah, that's. I just can't get the charcuterie plate out of my head now. With early bird gets the worm. I much prefer cheese on my plate than worms.
Yeah. I'm sorry I'm a little bit thoughtful today and I started to think about, how did I get here? And I've I didn't bring a copy, but I keep thinking of the eternal moment, which Jung defined as this moment in the life of you or any of us as an individual, and the fact that all your ancestors have worked up to this moment when you are alive and you are experiencing whatever it is. And you have to take this moment of physical life as the eternal moment, and not think of it about the distant future, but in this moment, select the best of the possibilities, the best thing that you can do. Um,
I like
for,
that because it's like gold panning. You pull
yeah,
out the bits,
it
so
really is. Yeah,
you don't reason with all the alluvium, all the little sand and silt. You just toss that back to the river.
yeah,
And I think there's that, how to swim brightly focused in the storm. What you're the gold nugget. Pull out the good stuff, the actionable stuff. I think what is the four agreements? Maybe I'm misquoting, but before saying something to someone, is it necessary? Is it kind? Is it beneficial? And then pick your last for the fourth. That's something that's benevolent, where you don't have to talk about every little thing. Just
yeah,
like the gold nuggets. Pull out what's good.
yeah,
And I think also there's in that using that as the way. There's no drama. You're not shaming someone. You're not judging them. You're experiencing them.
yeah. Very often I have to visit one of our children in our quote unquote decision making room or our in school intervention. We have two, and um, these are kids who've been misbehaving yesterday, let's say, usually yesterday. And so when they come to school, they're told that they have this penalty from the day before. And what I've often found true is that, and one of my duties anyway, for the kids that are on my caseload is I have to visit them when they're in this detention, in school detention. And when I do that, some of them are quite defiant. Okay. And I just go in and I don't say anything to them. I just sit there and let them work it out.
Yeah.
It
And
seems to work.
that's in alignment too with one of Rainer Maria Rilke's statements. One of the highest forms of love is protecting your partner's solitude. So when they're, just railing and raging, you're reaching around a huge vessel to give them a place to have that storm. And like you said, literally work it out. The whole Pandora, get rid of all that malaise and ill. And then they haven't done anything they have to be responsible with consequences for. You're not judging them to punish them. You're seeing if they can self-heal. Maybe they can herp up and clean their own filter. And I bet you no one else around them has ever not played tennis and come back at them with the same kind of rage. And you're not giving them action reaction. You're giving them a place to, hey, it's okay to feel what you feel. And then if you do it in a private setting like that, it goes back to the, one zipped lip can create much more than one word out of rage, and you're giving them something they probably have never had, which is compassion. And hey, not that it's okay that you feel like this. You might not even say that, but they'll probably get the natural feeling that you're a safe space.
Yeah, Richard says detention is psychological torture. I spent months there in high school. Well, I don't know, Richard, did you go to a Catholic high school? I just wonder. I mean, even our kids typically only get like one period worth, or unless they've really been over the top.
Well, I remember fourth, it's funny, Catholic school. I was Methodist growing up, but when we were in South Texas, the public school system was so bad that my mom put me in a private school. And I remember getting 2 days of detention for showing up to the swim team photo in my swim trunks and no shirt. And, the nuns running across the gymnasium, this big black robes flying. It felt like it was a gladiator, and when the Persians are coming on the horses with these heavy, and it's just like, oh my God. And they just, covered me up. And I had no idea that Catholic girls weren't supposed to see Catholic boys' chests. And I'm like, I don't swim in a t-shirt. So, but I got 2 days of detention. So talk about psychological torture. I didn't even know really why until weeks later when my mom asked Mother Superior and then dressed her down accordingly. But it's funny, yeah, that detention is torture. Carving up people's after school playtime.
Well, no, this is in school playtime. We take them right out of class.
Right. Well, I'm saying Richards. I mean, when growing up, if you got detention, it was always after school, but in school, yeah.
Yeah, and it took me a while to grok why we do it in school as opposed to after school. And I now get it because the kids are taken out of their milieu and they can't interact with their friends and so on.
And
go ahead.
In Malcolm X's time, when he was sent to prison for his activism, I don't know what year it was, but I remember it's in one of the books. I think it's titled X, and then Malcolm X. And So when he was imprisoned, he just, in his mind, he hated white people so much that he decided to read the Holy Quran. And so he began to develop this mindset of, well, wait a minute, maybe white people aren't so bad. Maybe oppression is bad.
Yeah.
Oppression is the reason why there's so much inequality. There's certain characters at play. And so that's when he was kind of enlightened. And I guess it's one of those things where, you know, you kind of have to be in this space, this subliminal space where there's nothing but concrete or white walls or a padded room to realize that, oh, wow, revelation time. I didn't realize that there's more to the world, there's more to life than whatever is happening. I mean, not when we're talking about children or political detention centers, some kids and some adults will get it, others will not. I know from my own personal experience, sometimes people do change and sometimes people don't change, but it's a very personal decision. But I also feel that when a child is at home and let's say they live with their aunt is their guardian and their aunt keeps them in a bedroom locked up all day, and then they don't have the best behavior and now they're in school being put in detention. It can be very traumatic and disheartening for that kind of child. That's why I'm such a huge advocate for people receiving some kind of support, just listening and being present and asking. Because I remember when I went to detention when I was in junior high school, because I was drinking alcohol out in the schoolyard because I thought it was cool. And I remember being sent to detention, and my dean, the dean of my school, he was an old school Italian guy, and we were talking about mobster movies the whole entire detention. And then he told me, well, next time if you do something bad again, you're not going to be in detention in this school. We have to ship you out to another school. So lo and behold, I was with my bad influence friend whose mom let her do whatever she wanted to do. And we were drinking alcohol again. And I didn't even like alcohol. I was literally just backwatching. I didn't even like it. I just wanted to, feel like I didn't have to follow these rules or whatever. I was very rebellious. And it wasn't until high school that I finally began to appreciate adult responsibilities. But when I was sent to the other school, there were other kids, and they were talking about being in detention and being and other kids who were expelled from school. They were speaking about it as though it was like some kind of a badge of honor, like, oh, I was suspended for this kid, he was finally expelled, so don't do that. We're like trading off, and I'm like, is this the beginning of prison life? Like, did I just sign myself up to go to prison when I grow up? So at that point, I was like, you know what? I have to tell this friend that I don't want to be friends with her anymore because I've heard these stories and I don't want to get expelled. I actually really like my classes. I love learning, but I just don't like the way that things are set up. So maybe some way, somehow, one day I'll figure out how to better express myself. in a more constructive way that actually makes sense, that won't cost me my education and my mother being pissed all the time and just being a statistic, you know, and it's a inner self revelation that sometimes we realize it and sometimes we don't.
I appreciate that perspective, because to me it's the difference. I've lately gotten, in the last year, more into a focus not on the nouns, not on the things, but on the active non-things, which are the verbs that live in the space between. So, for example, to control is a very incarcerating verb. It's truncating and it's restricting. But if I change, instead of to control, to navigate, it opens it up with more of a living verb. And like you used the word oppression, to oppress. If I switch to like what Skip does in school detention by sitting, it's like very Buddhist sit with the kid. Instead of to oppress, you're in the to nourish, to support with silence. And it's not the silent treatment. It's not stonewalling. It's the positive, beneficial silence of you're giving them space. So it's interesting. Your action there is it's not to control or to oppress. It's to navigate through silence, to nourish and to support.
Also, I also think it's mostly because of the stories of the other kids that I've heard. Because as soon as I heard what happened with the other kids, I said, "Oh my God." Because it's one thing when your parent is telling you, if you do so and so, you're going to end up like this. But then when you see it from someone in your cohort, it's totally different. I think that's what happened. Because as soon as the other kids were telling me, oh, and then the third time he was cutting class, or the third time he was arguing with the teacher, and then they expelled him, they expelled her. And I mean, the kids thought of me as like the Joan Jett in the in the group. They're like, oh my God, it's a girl and she's rebellious and she's doing what she wants to do. Oh my God, look at her.
Well, we have I mean, those kids still exist, and my school normally doesn't get them until they've been suspended twice at least. And so I have a perspective on what it is I do, which is that um, we're we have to keep them alive until they make it into high school, basically.
Right.
Right. And um, and keep ourselves alive. I mean, I often think not the last person that had my job, but the person before that left after one day, spent one day in doing my job and left and never came back, as I understand it. And I
At
don't
the
know.
end of
Go
at
ahead.
the end of the day, you know, it kind of really is about the inner self. Because according to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration, suicide has a higher rate than homicide. So people are killing themselves more than they are getting killed, and that's very scary.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, very much so. Well, some this teacher that I got on the wrong side of, or administrator that I got on the wrong side of, she told me that mind you, uh, I teach sixth and eighth grade math and sixth and eighth grade English language arts. And I have a co-teacher with me when I do that, and the co-teacher is the owner of the classroom, and I have to go between classes all the time, every hour. And she claims that I am required to do planning, lesson planning twice a week. And I said, so you mean that I have 4 different classes, so I have to plan 8 lessons a week? I said, you're expecting too much. Absolutely. I mean, that's just nutty. Especially the stuff that I get into. But anyway, um, here's a question for you. What do you remember from middle school? What lesson? I don't mean what you learned outside of the classroom. I mean, what did you learn in middle school that you still remember? I'm not asking anybody to answer that, but I remember zero. I mean, I remember that I took algebra, and I did take Latin also, but I don't remember a thing from either of those classes. And I do remember my 8th grade Latin teacher, who was also my 9th grade Latin teacher, and who made it a condition of passing in 8th grade that I take Latin 1 again in 9th grade. That was the condition of not giving me an F for.
I remember as a 7th grade, I signed up for a speed reading course, and it's just indelible. I remember it was such a badge of honor, that I think it was 1,563 words a minute, 96% reading comprehension, which means you could read a 400-page book in 2 hours. And now I try my best not to do that.
Oh God, yes.
It's more to steep and savor, because I mean you're doing 3 to 10 word chunks when you're doing that.
Mhm.
And it was great for a kid. It was like BMX bicycle for the mind. But then later I'm like, well, why do you want to be the golden child? That's stupid. It's
Yeah.
like, slow down, live more slowly, go slower to go faster. But I laugh though, if you mentioned, middle school, that's always the first thing that comes to mind. I just loved that course. It was, and I think part of it was the teacher. She
Mhm.
just had this way of, she almost would modify her language when she spoke to each person. She was such a natural that
Mhm.
you couldn't not understand her. And she made all the difficult things simple in different ways. Um, Plus, I think it was at a Baptist church with a pool table, and I always thought that was interesting.
Okay, I think I'm going to call it quits for today, because next paragraph has to do with getting into the 7 sermons of the dead in
Yeah,
more detail, and I want to do that when we're fresh.
yeah, because it's a gear switch right there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And whew, and I'm anything but fresh right now. I'll be happy when 3 more weeks
3
have
more weeks.
passed.
Yeah, right.
I
Yeah.
remember something very painful in junior high. I remember feeling a lot of regret because I had a woman who was taking care of me while I was growing up, and she
Oh, you muted.
You muted.
oh sorry. She was like my second mother, and she was from the Philippines, and her husband was from Taiwan, and they would always complain about Taiwanese independence from China
Mhm.
growing up. And so I felt really sad because I know that she was rooting for me so much, but I guess the main reason why I felt so much pain was because I was the overachieving student. But then one morning, while I was taking summer classes for gifted students at the synagogue, uh, which had a private school, and I was sexually assaulted.
Mm.
And that pain and agony was haunting me my entire pre-teenhood. And so that's when I began to feel very depressed. I would come home from school feeling very, very depressed. And that's what I remember. I remember so much pain. And now that I'm older and I wasn't able to attend Flora's funeral, what I do feel is grateful because she had the gift of love. She found her soulmate. They lived a beautiful life together, and um and you know, and that gives me closure, the fact that she had her soulmate and that we have so many beautiful memories of apple picking and studying biology. And um yeah, so that's my sermon to the woman who I love very much, and admire forever. And I'm so grateful to God every day that I was able to meet this amazing, wonderful, inspirational woman.
Empathetic
Yes.
woman,
Yeah.
presumably. Yeah.
Nice. Thanks for sharing that.
Oh, goodness. Yeah. Well, let's just remember as we go forth into our weeks that everybody is hurting. Okay, everybody is hurting one way or another. And so we should all try to be kind to one another if we can, because you can be part of the solution or you can be part of the problem. And
Well, that reminds me of the little girl meme where her mom says, "Are you going to be part of the solution or part of the problem?" And the little girl goes, "I'm going to be the whole problem." But she had such a smile that, it's like,
Yeah, well, little girls can be that way, I guess, with especially with their mothers, as I understand it. I
My
know.
son is like that. He's the full package.
yeah.
Well, um,
It's just my karma, I guess.
well, how old is your son?
Adam just turned 11 years old last month.
Well, okay. He has a future of caring very much for his mother. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. They do, that age group from 11 to 15 is a time when, as I tell my kids, that middle school's a time when you have to realize that you're going to have to take responsibility for your own life. Not, there's not always going to be mama to help you. Yeah.
Well,
And
0 to 7, generative, nurturing, maternal mom. 7 to 14, boys and girls both gravitate to the dad for structure to give form and identity to that nurture. And so, and then, ancient cultures, then, they dose you with peyote and kick you out into the wild. Do the wolves eat you? Do you come back with, animal friends? So,
Yeah, or in the Messiah, where at age, I think it's 11, it's either 11 or 14, they put you out in front of the village with a spear and wait for the lion to charge.
Mhm.
And yeah.
I always tell my son, you're a gentle giant. Don't be shy. You're okay. Don't worry.
Is he bigger than you are now?
He's very strong
Uh,
because his father and his stepmom, they're both black belts in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So he's always like, Mommy, I'm worried. And I'm like, it's all about self-control. Just, take it easy. Be a gentle giant. You're not scary. It's okay. Don't be shy. Yesterday we went to Chick-fil-A and he said, Mommy, I'm so nervous. I don't want to go inside by myself to get a cup of water. I said, we just spent $50. Go get a cup of water. He said, please. And I said, okay. So I purposely, instead of just leaving our stuff behind, I purposely took all of our things, and he's listening, by the way. I took all of our things and I went, okay, let's go back inside and get your water. And he's like, can you do it for me? I said, oh my God. And then the manager, he said, you're gonna have to give me another $50 if you want some water. And I said, oh, okay, well. And my son, he was freaking out, and I said, now I understand. It's because you don't want to have small talk with people. You just want to go in there, get your water, and get out. You don't want to small talk.
yeah, I'm very poor at small talk actually. Or I mean, all talk is small at some level, but um, I always want to talk about the fate of the universe. Things like that. Right. Okay, let's all have a good week. And it's a sunny day here in Annapolis. Thank God, and
Same here.
thank goodness we don't live in Kentucky or Missouri where they had those awful tight tornadoes this week.
Yeah.
So anyway, peace, everyone. Have
All
a
right.
good week. We'll talk about the seven sermons more next week. Take care.
Cool.
Oh, one thing though, I have read the seven sermons of the dead into this YouTube channel. So if you're dying to know what's in them, you can go listen to those recordings, which just put the seven sermons to the dead into this channel, and you'll find many videos about it.
And
So
I would
peace.
suggest afterwards also read the Lament of the Dead, and because
Oh yeah.
they dance well together.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a good idea. Lament of the Dead is after the publication of the Red Book, when James Hillman and Sonu Shamdasani did a tour speaking engagements, which were recorded and then transcribed into what is today the Lament of the Dead is the name of the book. So peace, everyone.